This is the hottest spot in Toronto. And this is the coolest spot in Toronto. How do we know that? Well, it's all thanks to a study done by Professor Karen Smith and her team of researchers who have mapped heat vulnerability in Toronto. Since 2023, as part of the School of Cities Urban Challenge Grants, Professor Smith, Shuchen Bu, Professor Fadi Massoud, and Alex Scheinbaum have been conducting research to discover which parts of Toronto are most at risk from high temperatures. I spoke with Professor Smith to learn more about her team's research and why it's relevant today.
Obviously, the climate is getting warmer, right? And so mapping out vulnerable areas across the city to heat is going to be really important for the city to respond to the greater number of heat waves that we're going to have in the future. So that was one of our goals, is to provide the city with an up-to-date map of kind of the most vulnerable areas in the city. So things like locations for new cooling centers could be identified kind of based on some of the mapping that we've done. Also, canopy cover, tree canopy cover tends to ameliorate heat. So, the city has a campaign to plant a lot of new trees. So can we be strategic about where those trees can be planted to help mitigate heat? There's all sorts of reasons why this is important right now, because we are certainly going to be experiencing more and more heat in the coming years. Heat vulnerability combines three different metrics. Heat exposure, so the actual kind of physical temperature or humidity. Sensitivity to heat, so people who are more sensitive tend to be the elderly, or people with underlying health conditions. And then adaptive capacity is communities or individuals' ability to cope with heat. So do they have, for example, access to air conditioning? Do they have access to a cooling center? So these are kind of the three ingredients, I guess, that go into heat vulnerability.
By making maps with that formula, heat exposure multiplied by the difference between sensitivity and adaptive capacity, governments can identify priority neighborhoods for implementing cooling measures.
One of the biggest solutions, I would say, is access to cooling, right? So, there are cooling centers as a potential solution, but also just having cooling available to you in your home or your workplace is going to be something that we need to prioritize going forward. So in Vancouver, for example, I believe that's the City Council, it's one of their initiatives is for new builds that, air conditioning is a priority. We have regulations around heating in the city, and, when landlords need to turn on the heat, we may need to have regulations similar to that around cooling as the climate continues to warm, because heat is a big risk factor, and we see this all the time with heat waves. The number of mortalities can be quite high. We worry a lot about the cold because we're in Canada and we talk a lot about the cold, but the heat can be really deadly.
So, the next time you're walking around your neighborhood on a sweltering summer day, you can think about what factors allow or don't allow your neighborhood to adapt to high temperatures. Is there a generous canopy of trees? Or are there enormous parking lots? If you're in an apartment without air conditioning, can you find a public swimming pool or a nearby cooling center? Because as global temperatures rise, there will be nothing hotter than being cool. To learn more about the spatial distribution of heat vulnerability in Toronto, Canada, and other research at the School of Cities, visit www.schoolofcities.utoronto.ca.